Welcome back. The next blueprint we're going to be working on here is going to be the addition of a key pickup requirement to open up that door. So what I have done, and I've provided it for you, is I've gone into a 3D program and I've modeled a key and given you a key model and a photograph or a texture that you're going to have to import into Unreal, and you're going to have to assemble to make into a complete unit. And the complete unit is going to look like this. So when you bring it in and create the texture for it, you're going to have a key that can be placed on the floor. Now, the material, which is explained in the handout, it shows you in the handout exactly how the material needs to be made, but just so you know, it's a very simple material. It just has the photograph brought in. I've given it a little bit of metallic and specular. About a half is just about half as shiny as you want it to be, and then I've given it a little bit more than half. Remember, roughness is the mirror-like quality, 0 is mirror, 1 is not a mirror, so this is a little about 3/4 of the way towards being mirrored, and it gives us this nice reflection, make it look like a reflective metal, gold metal ring or key, and so you get a little bit of world reflection in it, and it just stands out a little bit more. The other nice thing about this is that reflection makes it a little bit easier to spot on the ground because it is a small key. You don't want this giant key. It's got to look like it's the size of a real key, so it's fairly small on the ground and kind of hard to spot. So this gives it a little extra shininess and reflectivity so it stands out just a little bit better. But those are the two things that you need to have. You're going to bring in the texture, which looks like this. You're going to create a material, which is given to you in the handout, and you'll be able to see how to do that. And then you're going to apply it to your model. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and place a copy of that key over here. In fact, I'm going to remove that one. I'm going to replace that with just the key so you can see. Don't want that out there for right now. So I just have a little tiny key placed on the ground right there. And it has to be someplace that is not obvious. You don't want it to be right next to them. You don't want it to be sitting on a shelf. It has to be something that the player is going to have to go search for and have to go find. I'm still using the same world here. But it needs to be something, and you can set it on the ground and rotate it. It doesn't really matter how you do this, as long as it's a key sitting on the ground. And the player can then go and search and find it out. So if I go back in here to play now, I know it's back over there. It's not easy to find, but I can wander over here and start to see it, and there it is laying right there on the ground in the middle of that tile. Now I probably put more effort into that key than I really actually needed to, but I wanted it to look good because that's kind of the way I do things. If I'm going to do it, might as well make it look good. So I was real happy with the way that thing turned out. It's not too heavy in terms of modeling requirements. It was a fairly easy thing to do. It took me about 10 minutes total, I think, to build that whole thing, and it was a nice touch in addition to the game. Now, you don't have to use a key if you don't want to. One of the things that I always stress is, if you want to be creative, be creative. Hotels nowadays all use room keys or room cards. So you have a key card that you use to swipe to get into your room, and keys have become a thing of the past. So you can kind of set this up any way you want to do it. It depends on what you're trying to represent, or if the door looks like it has a sliding thing in there, or that kind of a key lock on it, then maybe that's what you want to do. This just actually has a general, actually that does have that. So you can see you can create a little card that would work on that also. You're not actually going to present the card into it. What we're going to do is we're going to set this up in such a way that the game knows that the player has picked the key up. And it doesn't allow you to open this door until it checks to see whether, using a Boolean variable, whether or not you have a key or you don't. And that's where we're going to go with this. We're going to go over, we're going to pick up the key. It's going to disappear off the ground. The blueprint is going to keep in its memory that you have picked up the key. And then when you come to the door, it's going to look at the blueprint and say, do you have the key? If you do, go ahead and open. If you don't have the key, then nothing is going to happen. And that's where we're going to go with this. And so we're going to go back, and I'm going to use the same level. Like I said, I just did my elevator in. We're only going to add a few changes to this as we go. So the first thing we're going to do is, now that we've got that key sitting over there, we need to actually turn it into a blueprint. So what we're going to do is we're going to need a trigger to go with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a blueprint. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go to Asset Actions, and we're going to go to create a blueprint using this. And it's going to ask me where I want it to go. I'm keeping all of my blueprints and everything in the same place. It's going in my static meshes folder here, so I've got it. And I'm going to change the name of this one to BP. And then I'm going to do key 2 because I already have the other key in here. I'm just going to set that up as the new one and click OK. And then it's going to give me my little blueprint here with the same usual little goodie there is laying on the ground. It's set up over here. I'm going to change the name of this to key pickup just so I know what it is. Just again, you kind of want to be a little bit more specific. If it's going to let me do that, maybe it won't let me do it. Yep. So type in over here on the variable name. I can go in and rename that thing key pickup. That way it's a little bit easier to keep track of what I'm doing. Now what I need to do, like we've done several times before, is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a box collision on it. Now the box collision is not very big. We don't want it to be very big. Basically what's going to happen is when the player comes in contact with that trigger box, it's going to activate the things we need to do. If I make that trigger box too big, then you're going to get into it's going to the key's going to disappear on you, and you're going to pick it up even though you're nowhere near it. So I try to keep this one very precise and very small. So I'm actually not doing anything to it. I'm keeping that box the exact same size. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of this box. I'm going to call it a pickup trigger. So I've got a key pickup and I got the pickup trigger. And basically that's all I need to do on this one. I'm going to compile that and I'm going to close it down. And then what I'm going to do is I put that key out over here. But remember, when we want to swap an existing model with one that we have just done and we want it to take its place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and here's my BP key 2. Let's do a quick save, and then I'm going to do a save all, make sure I've got it all. And I'm going to make sure that that's selected, and then I'm going to right click on that key and I'm going to just say replace the selected actor with BP key 2, and there it is, and I can see that trigger. So I get an idea of how big that trigger is. And I can't actually see it in the world when I go in and play, but I think that's about right. I don't want that to be too big. I really want my player to have to almost stand on it in order for it to work. So that might even be a little bit big, but you can go back and make that adjustment a little bit later on. So that key is there, and it's ready to go. All right, now one of the things we have not done so far is we have not talked about. We've done all of our blueprints in the individual asset blueprint. So we created a blueprint actor like the door or the key, or we're going to be doing one for our light and things like that. We've done those before, and we've done level blueprints. The elevator was a level blueprint. What we're going to do now, however, is we're going to deal with a blueprint that is part of the existing player in the game. Now, in this particular case, I am in third person. Now you could do this one in first person, it doesn't really matter. It's going to work exactly the same. Where's that key over there? There it is. Okay. This is going to work exactly the same, but we need to go back, and it's the first person player or the third person player is the one who is picking up the key. Therefore, when I need to add a variable as to whether or not the key has been picked up, it's the third person player at this point is the blueprint that's going to store the information that says I have picked up the key. Now, in order for me to do that, I'm going to have to change that third person blueprint. Now, if you've got, this is a third person game, so I have a folder over here called third person BP. If you're playing the first person level, you're going to have, it's going to say first person BP. Either way, it's going to be the same. When you open that folder up over here, I'm not going to pull that out. When you open that up, close those all up, you're going to see animations, blueprints, characters, maps, meshes, and then in this particular case, the third person overview, which is the base level that thing takes place and shows you other things that are in there. The blueprints folder here contains two things. It contains a third person game mode, which we're going to talk about game modes later in the semester. This is what handles controllers and things like that. And then we have the third person character. This is actually the third person. So there he is, all the elements in this blueprint. This is the one that's constructed that allows us to play. All right, so I have some basic elements in here. I already have a light here, which basically ignore because that's part of the flashlight thing. But we have our basic character here. We've got a capsule around him, and we have the camera that's situated back here behind him. Now this is the third person camera, and this controls what you see. So just so you know, if you want to change the third person view, maybe you'd like the third person view to be a little bit closer, or maybe you'd like it to be a little bit higher, or maybe you'd like it to maybe be a little closer, a little higher, and aim down just a little bit. This is where you're going to go in to do that. And by making those changes, if I pull this out of the way now, I'm a little bit closer to him and a little bit higher up just by default. So you can make those kinds of changes to that blueprint, but this is where we go in to actually make those changes. It's inside this blueprint. Now if I look at my construction script, there is nothing there, just the base node right here. And then under my event graph, this is everything that pertains to the third person player. So there's the gamepad input. This controls, basically how your gamepad works, which input you're going to use, which way you're going to turn, which way you're going to run. We have the mouse input is set up in here. We've got our regular movement input that tells you which direction you're going and how fast you're going. We've got the jumping animation in here. We've got the touch input animation in here. And there's another one over here which I'm ignoring because we're going to show you how to do that in a second. But this is where we're going to go in, and we're going to have to add in the elements that we need to have to make this player function the way we need to do it. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do in here, in fact, the only thing we're going to need to do in here, is we need to create a new variable, and we're going to give that variable a certain name so we can track it down later on from elsewhere in another blueprint. So what we're going to do is you're going to come over, and where it says variables over here on the left, you're going to click the little plus sign that's going to create a new variable, okay, and it's going to add it in. What you're going to do is you're going to call it got gold key, and I've already got one right here, so I'm going to delete that. It's called got gold key. Okay, it's red, it's a Boolean, and then you can put spaces in there if you want to, or not. It doesn't really matter. I've got no spaces in there. Remember, spaces inside the program here doesn't really matter. It's just certain things have to have spaces. But any of these little controls in here that you've got, you don't really have to have spaces in there. But the important thing is that it's a Boolean. It's a true-false. So we're answering the question, got the gold key, yes or no? It's as simple as that. I don't really want any of the other elements that are in here. They don't really pertain to it. We're just simply asking, do you have a key or do you not have a key? So in this particular case, we're saying, do you have the gold key? And you can be as descriptive in here as you want. Maybe it's not a gold key. Maybe you don't. You just say get key. It doesn't matter, or got key. It's asking the question whether or not the player is in possession of a key. So we add this into there, okay? That's the flashlight down there. So we're going to add that in through there. And that's all we have to do. Got gold key is going to go in here, and that becomes an element now within the player. All right. So let's go back out here, and we can just close that down. That's the only thing we're going to have to do in this particular assignment. That's all we have to do to that player to make that change. So I'm going to go back into my static meshes in here, and I'm going to go back to my BP key 2, and I'm going to open it up. And in my event graph, I'm going to delete all of the stuff that's in there, because I don't really want any of that stuff. And I'm going to make sure that my pickup trigger is selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, here's what I want to happen. When I pick up that key, what I would like to do is I would like to go in and have the key disappear, so it looks like it's been picked up. And I need to then pass the information that the key has been picked up back to my third person character. And Now remember, I just put that variable in called got gold key. So what we're going to do is we're going to give that variable the answer it's looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a begin overlap like we do for a lot of things. When you're actually going to step into a trigger, I'm going to right click here. I'm going to go to add event for that pickup trigger, and we'll go to collision and we'll say add on component begin overlap. And we've seen this many times before, and we'll continue to see these things again. Now here's where it varies just a little bit. What we need to do is we now need to pass the information back to the third-person character that has been picked up. So rather than pull a wire out of here and look for something, what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull it out of this other actor, and you'll see why here. I'm going to pull it out of this other actor, and I'm going to type in cast to third person. Okay, and then what I'm looking for here out of all of that is cast to third person character, and it comes in pre-wired and ready to go. So what's going to happen is when I step on this trigger, it is then going to, because that's really all we're doing, hiding that ring, that key, or making it go away is a completely separate item. I mean, it's going to happen at the same time, but the important part of that is when I step on that trigger, I am telling the third person character that something has happened. Okay, and what it is I am telling them happen is we're going to go back and we're going to look for that third person, that gold key pickup that I've got. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come out of this cast to third person, and I'm going to type in set got gold key, and you'll notice that it turns up. Now it turns up here because I've already made that variable, and I've already applied it into the third person. Anytime you make a variable, no matter what kind of variable it is, it then gets added to this list. So you can call up variables from other objects and put them into this object, which is how it works. I'm picking up the key, and the information is being passed from the key pickup back to, or from this trigger back to that third person. So by me adding the variable into the third person, it now becomes available anywhere else I go in the world just by typing in. I can either do the got gold key, and it'll bring out just that little single capsule shape, or I can use set got gold key, and what that does is that's going to come in and it's going to be pre-wired. And the question now is I'm going to wire target back to this as third person. So I step into the trigger, tell the third person character that I have the gold key. I'm checking that box right there. So those three elements together right here are the casting back to the third person that the key has been received, and really strictly speaking, it's not that the key has been received, it's just that the player has stepped on the trigger. The trigger is what is saying, yes, I have the key. All right. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, well, in order to make this thing appear that I've actually picked up a key, I just need to go back and maybe make that key disappear. So while this is the structure that identifies it, I'm going to take this one step further. I'm going to pull something out of here, and I'm going to look for destroy. I'm going to type in destroy. I can't spell, so destroy. And what I am looking for here is actually I'm looking for destroy actor. Okay, once I find my destroy actor, it's right there underneath utilities. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that, and then that should remove the key from the game when I'm done. All right, so I'm going to compile that. I'm going to pull this out of the way, and let's go over and test and see whether or not that's working. So now when I run over here, when I come in contact with that trigger, and I'll see if I can do it, it picks it up and it's gone. Now that trigger is a little bit big, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into that trigger. here. Come back over to this, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that trigger box maybe a little bit smaller. So I'm going to make that maybe 16 on the X and 16 on the Y. That makes it a little bit narrower box. The height is good. I need to make it sure it's high enough for me to bump into. But I really want to make sure that I'm really directly on top of that key before I can actually pick it up and make it disappear. So we'll go back and test that again. And then there's the key. I'll look and go over it, and I pick it up. So I picked up that key. So all I've done at this point is I've made that key disappear by picking it up. But more importantly, what this has done is this base graph in here. I stepped on the trigger, told the third person I have the key, and then, oh yeah, destroyed the key, so it was gone. All right, so we're pretty good there. So that's the second part. This is really being done in 3 parts because I needed to create the key and get the blueprint all set up for the key. I needed to make sure the blueprint was set up for my player, which we did by adding that got gold key variable. Now the last thing for me to do is to go back and to do the door. So to do the door here, what I'm going to do is I've got one there already. I'm just going to replace that real quickly here with a regular door, so I can show you how we do this. So that's just a regular door there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that door and I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go back to Asset Actions. We're going to create a blueprint door. I'm going to put it back in the same folder. And we're going to call this one a BP door key 2 because I've already got one. All right. And then what we're going to do on this one is, this is actually a little bit simpler. I'm going to go ahead and select that mesh, and we'll call this one, rather than static mesh, we'll call it door key, just so I know. Hit enter so it's locked in. And I'm going to add another collision box to it because I need to be able to collide with it to make it work from either side. Okay, and it doesn't really matter at this point, but I don't know whether I'm going to be using this door from one way or the other. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a component, and we're going to add another box collision. And what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. I think 64 was about the width we wanted on that, and I think I only need about maybe 10. And I'll make that 16 just to make sure. And then we'll make it about the height that we need, which I think was about 100. 100, maybe 120, 110. And just so I'm overlapping my door here. And again, I'm trying to keep this thing as centered on it as I can, so I'm not, activating the door from somewhere else in the world. And I'm just kind of centering it on this one, moving it around, trying to keep this thing as centered on that as I possibly can. Now I have the ability to trigger this door from either side, so I can put it anywhere in the world and have it still function exactly the same. Okay. Now we're going to go back in here to our event graph, and again I'm going to delete these things. And with my, let's call this one door trigger. So I got my door key, my door trigger. What I'm going to do is have my door trigger selected, and I'm going to go back in here to my event graph, and I'm going to do the same basic thing that we just did a second ago, which is I need to know whether or not I have actually picked up the key. When I come back and bump into the door, it needs to check whether or not that's been done. So the first thing we'll do is we'll add the basic collision. Here's what happens when I touch that door trigger. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same basic thing we did a second ago. We're going to pull a wire out of here, cast to third person. Character. And you might think, well, we just did that with the key. Why are we doing it here? It's because what cast to third person is really referring to, and if you look at the little icon that's on there, it's really arrows that go both ways. And so what this is looking at is this is looking back to the third person character again, because I put that's where I put the got gold key variable. So it has to look to see whether or not that has been done. Now, what happened with the key, and when I created that little key on the ground, remember what I did was I checked the box. I said set gold key yes, check the box, and let everybody know that you have picked that key up and that you have it in your possession. What I am doing here with the door is I am checking to see whether or not that's what's going on. So in this particular case, what I'm going to be doing is I now need to look to see whether or not the gold key has been received. So where I did that before, I wired that out of as third person. I'm going to put a wire, out of here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now look for get got gold key. So last time I got set, and that's how I was able to say yes or no, I have it. Now I'm looking to see, did you get that? And what you get is one of the more unusual elements that we have in here, and that is something that starts out blue but turns red. Remember, I've talked about only certain colored things can be wired to other colored things. You can only really wire blue to blue and red to red and green to green and so forth and so on. This is one of those things where the got gold key is a Boolean variable, but what I've got down here is I actually have a different type of a node, and that's checking to see whether or not a target has been achieved, whether or not something is a particular goal has been achieved. So it starts out as a blue float and then ends up as a Boolean, so it can then be wired into something else. Okay, so step on the door trigger, or you're going to bump into the door trigger. It's going to look back to the third person, and it's going to say, do you have the gold key? Because if you have the gold key, then what we need to do is we need to do something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull a wire out of here, and we're going to get the yes or no, true or false Boolean equivalent, which is a branch. Okay, I'm going to pull it over there, and I'm going to wire this into that because this is asking, okay, it's going to give me a true or false. Do I have it or do I not have it? Well, it's asking me what the condition is. The condition is that I have the gold key. So in this particular case, if I have the gold key, then true is going to do something and false is going to do something else. Now, I don't really have a false in this particular sense. I'm just showing you basically how to set this up so it functions the way you want it to do. You can always go back and add things in later on your own. Some of the things that you could think about doing would be, and we're going to talk about sounds later in the semester, so I'd have to go in and talk about audio and all that stuff now, and I don't want to get the cart before the horse, but you could go in and add in a sound, say, if you don't have the key and you're trying to get through the door, it's the sound of a door rattling. Or maybe I play an animation where the door jiggles a little bit, like you grab the handle and you're trying to push or pull on it, and it moves a little bit, but it won't actually open, and also plays the sound of the door being jiggled and while it's locked. The variety of things. You can actually have text appear that says, oh, you haven't done everything you need to have, or go find the key, or some sort of an informational thing that can pop up. You can do that through the false. Because I really don't, I'm really more inclined to show you here what happens if you actually do have the key and how it works. I'm actually going to go out of here, and we're going to run out of the true statement rather than out of the false statement. Now, so what we're going to do is, if you do have the key, we need to open up the door. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do the same basic thing that we did when we set up the door opening the first time we did that using Blueprint. We're going to go in here and we're going to add a timeline. So I'm going to pull a wire out of here, and I'm going to go clear to the bottom down here, and we're going to add the timeline. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one door open with key. Okay. And then I'm going to double click on it to open it up. And we've seen these before. We've done this already. Door open with key. I need a float value to be added into this, or a float variable. So I'm going to click this float track button, the F+. There's my keyframes. And we're going to do this a little differently than we did the last one. The last one, the door opened, stayed open, and then door closed. I'm only doing a door open in this particular case. So it's going to be a little bit different than that one was. but you'll see it works pretty much the same thing we're doing there. First thing I'm going to do in here is I want my length to be only 4 seconds. I'm going to have that door open in the space of 4 seconds. I'm also going to say use the last keyframe. Now what this does is if let's say for example, I've just set the maximum animation to 4 seconds. But what if I had a keyframe here at 0 and I had another keyframe at 1.5? Then what it would do is, even though the animation is 4 seconds long, it would only use the first 1.5 seconds of the animation. Why would that be important? Why would that even be an option? Why not just set it so if you just shorten it up so it's only 1.5 seconds long? It's going to be a 4-second animation. So it is going to take 4 seconds for it to cycle through it. Whether there's only 2 keyframes at 1.5 seconds is irrelevant. It's still going to be a 4-second animation. So if I set the keyframe at 1.5 and I say use the last keyframe, what would happen is it would animate from 0 to 1.5. The door would open up in 1.5 seconds, but then nothing could ever happen again until it reaches the end of its animation track. Once it reaches the end, then basically think of it as resetting again. So you can't do anything for that last 3.5 seconds until, or 2.5 seconds, until it has finished its run and then come back and do that. So by saying use last keyframe, I'm pretty much saying I'm only going to be having a keyframe at 0 and a keyframe at 4, and I'm going to ignore everything in between. So it's just a good habit to get into, to use the last keyframe, just because it's a little bit easier to set up. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add 2 keyframes. The first one, it doesn't really matter where you put them. Because I'm lazy, I just want to go in and just say, let's just get these things as quick as possible. Hold down the Shift key and left click, and then left click. I just need 2 keyframes. I'm going to select the first one. This is going to be time 0, and this is going to be a value of 0. Okay, and then I'm going to select the second one. I'm going to put the time is going to be 4, and the value of this one is going to be 1. All right. Now, when we did this before, let's go ahead and get these things so we've got a full screen here. This is not the way I did the last one. The last time we did the door, we rotated it 90 degrees or minus 90 degrees. And so my first keyframe, the value was 0. And then my second keyframe, which was it opens up, was minus 90. And then the third keyframe was minus 90. That meant it didn't move. And then the last keyframe was back to 0 again, so the door swings away from the player, stays for a second or two, and then swings shut. And that's the way I had that animation set up. This one, I'm only opening it. I don't really care about the closing on this one. So what I'm doing here is, rather than using the value of the degrees, minus 90 or 0 or whatever it is I want it to do. And remember, by the way, when we're doing these, we only deal with 0, 90, or minus 90. We don't go into 180. I don't say 180 degrees because it doesn't really know what to do. If I say it's 90 degrees, it's going to open away from me. If I say it's 90, it's going to open up behind me. That's still a 180 degree swing, but I'm not going to say 180 degrees. I'm going to give it a value of plus or minus 90, and it's going to know which way it needs to go. In this particular case, my 2 values are 0 and 1. 0 in this particular case is going to indicate, the value 0 indicates not moving. The value 1 indicates moving. So this one's a little bit different than the last one we did. All right, now, just like I did on the last one, I'm going to select both of those keyframes, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select auto, and that's going to give me a gradual speed up and then a gradual slow down up here at the top. Remember, we did that automatically for us when we handled the elevator. It knew to do that on its own, but in here we have to actually tell it to do that. Otherwise, it's going to take off opening and then just stop. And you need it to be a more gradual increase of speed than a gradual decrease. I'm also going to go over here and change this new track. Let's go ahead and call that door opens, because that's going to be, this is actually going to be the name of the output we're going to see here in just a second. So I'm going to compile that. And I'll go back here to my event graph. You'll see door opens is what that says here right now. So that's kind of what I wanted to make sure that I knew which of those elements. This is the element that I'm going to be wiring out of. So this is important that you know which of these you're supposed to use. And if you're not sure, that's the name right there. Whatever you type in here, if I go back and put a space in that and say we're going to call that door opens, when I come back out over to here, that's now called door opens with a space. So this is the one that you're going to be working out of as we do things. Now, last time when we did the door, in fact, let me call that up here really quickly so we can kind of show you the difference here. If I go back and look at my blueprint door, go back at my event graph, we have this rather elaborate system over here. My door movement, I had to go in and say make rotational, and then I had to combine rotators, and I had to do begin rotation. This whole element in through here, remember, this was determining whether or not where the door was in the world and whether or not it would work separate from any other door in the world. And that's kind of what this does. This looks and says start at 0, your beginning rotation, and then combine that with the position in the world. So if it's rotated 30 degrees and it's going to open 90 degrees, it doesn't open from 0 to 90, which is what this one was set for. It opens up from 30 to 120 degrees. So it figures out where it is and then adds that rotational stuff on top of it. I don't have that when I'm working with this one. That doesn't exist. I'm just rotating that door in this level blueprint, or in the blueprint, I'm rotating it 90 degrees. This is just going to be a simple, or 110 degrees is what I'm going to do it. But this will work very well for what I'm trying to do. And we're not going to do it that way. So here's what I have to do. I have to go and pull out of this doors open, and I'm going to be looking for something called a lerp. And the lerp I'm looking for is a lerp rotator, because I'm going to be rotating that door. Okay? So the door is going to rotate. Now, what I've got here is I've got two values. The way a lerp stands for linear interpolative. And what that does is that looks for the difference between two values. In this particular case, we have value A and value B. Now, value A in our circumstance is going to be the beginning position of the door, or the beginning rotation of the door. And the door is not rotated, so the beginning rotation is going to be 0. Okay? B is going to be the end rotation. So how many degrees is it going to roll before it stops and is open? In this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it 110 degrees. Now, we have R, P, and Y. We do not have X, Y, and Z. And we talked about that in the door. We have roll, we have pivot, and we have yaw. And remember, these are flight controls determining which direction it is going to rotate. In this particular case, yaw is what matches up with the Z-axis. Roll matches up with the X. Pivot matches up with the Y. The Y for yaw matches up with the Z-axis. And we want it to rotate on its Z-axis. So if you look at that door back over here, you can see the Z-axis is right here. This is what I would like it to open or close on, is that axis. So we're going to be using the yaw, the Y, and we're going to highlight that, and we're going to type in minus 110. So what it's going to do is it's now going to rotate 110 degrees. That's going to be its final destination. The original, or the origin, I guess, rotation of it, if I can talk. The origin rotation is the position of the original static mesh. So what I'm going to do is take my component over here. It says door trigger, door key, and door open with key. My door key is the actual model itself. I'm just going to pull that out, and I'm going to drop it in, and I'm going to say get, because I need that little unit right there. Okay, and then I'm going to pull a wire out of here, and I'm going to look for relative rotation. Get relative rotation. And so this is the origin of the original door, the position that it is in the world, and this is going to be its relative rotation, and we're going to pull that into here. Now this is another one of those double capsules, much like this one back over here that starts out blue and turns red. This one starts out light blue and turns into this lavender color because these are lavender things. Now, I could do the same thing in here. I don't need to. I don't need to run two of these things into this category down here because it gives me the amount. I can actually type in the amount of the rotation right there. You'll notice up here when I plug those things into A, if I break that, I have my RP and Y, my roll, pivot, and yaw. If I wire that back up, those go away because what these two things are saying is the relative rotation at the beginning is the starting point. And then we're going to take that position and we're going to rotate it 110 degrees. Now, much like that, what we did with the door, when I had that door and I had that whole thing to check to see where it was in the world, this does the same thing. Because what this says is wherever that door happens to be, that's its relative position. And then it's going to rotate 110 degrees from there. So we're basically using two different things to do the exact same thing. Either way, we are determining that this is where it is in the world. It's going to rotate 110 degrees, move that door anywhere else, rotate it any amount you want, and it's going to know, take its starting position and its starting rotation, which is that right there, its starting rotation in the world, and then rotate it 110 degrees when we want it to run. Okay, now we're not quite done just yet, because now what we need to do is we need to go back and we need to say, look, we've got this update back over here. This is just looking and saying, you know, the door is going to open. Which way is it going to go? That's going to be fine. Now what we're going to do is we now need to make the rotation occur. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull out of the back end of this and we're going to look for set rotation, relative rotation. Set relative rotation. Okay. And what it's going to say is it's going to give me two options. There are two things in this scene that I can set the relative rotation for. I can do it for the door key or I can do it for the door trigger. And in this particular case I'm looking to set the relative rotation of the door key. Now these little parentheses that you see afterwards are relatively new in here. If you're using an older version of the program for whatever reason, maybe you can't get the newer one to run, you're not going to see that. But in this version and with the updates it's received, it now looks and says, well, you got two things. You're setting a relative rotation. Which one do you have? And we'll go ahead and finish it out for you. So rather than just say set relative rotation, okay, this now comes in and says we got the door key attached to it already. So this comes in and it says we know what you're doing. We're setting the relative rotation of the door key. The only thing I have to do now is wire this back to the door. So now what's going to happen is you step on the trigger. It's going to look back to the third person. Does the person have the gold key or not? If they do have the gold key, go ahead and play the animation of the door, take it to its position wherever it is in the world, and rotate it 190 degrees. And then set its rotation so it's done. Compile that. Now remember, coming back to this, if I wanted it to do something else, I would just do the same basic system up here. Maybe I wanted to have an animation where it starts to open, then it shuts. It's like it doesn't quite do what you need it to do. I can do a whole nother string down here. I've got a whole thing out of false. I can set up anything I want to down here. This is all being set up based off of, yes, the player does have the key. So that's compiled. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. And let's go back now and test to make sure that this works. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and I'm going to try the door. Nothing happens. Door will not work. No E key, nothing. Nothing works at all. Well, nothing's going to work either because I don't think it actually replaced that door yet. So let's do that. Let's take that door and let's replace it with BP door 2, that one that I've just done here. All right. So now, let's go back. Nothing happens. It will not let me in. Let's go find that little key. And you can, set your games up to do kind of whatever you want to do. You're going to see. Next thing we're going to do out of here is we're going to set up a material that can change when something happens. And so maybe you can set up, you know, a little signal by the door that once you picked up the key, you now know that you can use it. But in this particular case, this is all I'm doing. So I'm going to go pick up that key. Key is picked up. It's no longer sitting there on the ground. It's gone. Now that door knows to be activated. And when I come over to it and I touch that, the door opens up 110 degrees. I can go through, and it stays that way. Okay, it's not ever going to close because I didn't set it up to close. If I wanted it to close, I could do the exact same thing that I did before. Once you've picked up the key, you always have the key. And dropping the key when you're done is another set of commands, which we're going to get to later in the semester when we get into some more blueprint work with the skeletal meshes and doing some more work with them. But for right now, this is just, I got the key, the door opened up, and now I can continue on. I'm not carrying, I'm still carrying the key around. I can't set the key down at this point, but if I wanted to, I could go back in and say, look, I've got a keystroke that say I've got, you know, the key. Maybe even you could set that up so you pick up the key with a P on your keyboard, you pick it up, and then you can drop the key using the D key, and it'll appear on the ground wherever you happen to be. There's another set of blueprints that will handle all of that, and like I said, I'll have that for you later in the semester. So that works. It does everything I kind of want it to do. And it's a nice little key, and it's a nice simple thing. And like I said, you can set up your world to do just about anything. If you wanted to have, you know, a room key card to open up that door, you could. If you needed a player to go to another, like completely different level and do something, you can do that as well. There's you know, if you start putting your imagination to use, you can come up with all kinds of things that you could do playing off of this particular theme. You pick up the key, maybe there's a visual clue here back at the door to let you know that you have it. You know, you could do text like we did with the lighting down there. You can put text on the key that shows that you picked it up. You can put text on the door if you don't have the key, saying go back and find you got to go search for the key, or look for a gold key, or you can give the player all kinds of instructions by doing that. So there's a lot of different things that we can do for that. I think what I'll do maybe even later in the semester when we have some time, I'll go back and throw a couple of little more elements into this so you can see how it works. But I think you got the gist of how this goes. What we're going to do next, like I said, is we're going to go back and we're going to show you how to create a material. We're going to make one of the attributes of that material be dynamic, and then we're going to use Blueprint to change that material so light looks like it's glowing, or if you hit the key, or if you step out of the trigger, the light goes back and looks normal, and it looks like it's not lit, but you step into the trigger and the material actually changes to make the object glow. And that's what's going to be coming up next.